Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Educator historian Dr. Alan Singer is with us again, and this is being brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and Zoom. And we're taping the Wednesday before our Monday air. It just happens to be the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And we might as well jump off with that, folks, because in doing a quick little research on what was going on since the death of George Floyd, I came across a couple of stories, and the gist of them was that in 2021, a year after Floyd was dead, 2021 turned out to be as bad as any previous year for cops killing people of color, Black, brown, whomever. And 2022 seems to be pretty much on that same trend. Nothing has improved as far as cops killing Black people. I know there have been a lot of editorials and a number of stories, but I came across an amazing one that was written by somebody at the Boston Globe, which I shared with you guys. Renee Graham, I believe was her name. Bob, if you could just give us a little bit of her take on what a wasted opportunity the quote call for reckoning turned out to be, because there has been no reckoning.
Exactly. Like you said, written by an opinion piece by Renee Graham in the Boston Globe. And like you said, this was a missed opportunity in these 2 years since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. And she talks about how in the weeks after the murder and the months afterwards, the top books on the New York Times bestseller list all had to do with racial reckoning, policing, racial inequities and whatnot. And some of those same books today are being blocked from being spoken about in schools.
Being banned.
Yes, yeah.
Book bannings.
Yeah, incredibly. But I'll just quote her briefly. Of course, America never reckons with its racist transgressions. Heady notions of any reckoning disappeared faster than all those Black Lives Matter signs that suddenly popped up everywhere. We've been left with the bitter reality that our country deliberately squandered a pivotal moment ensuring that Floyd's death would be in vain. It's a very moving editorial, and she goes in with historical notes. It's an impressive editorial.
It's a powerful piece. Boston Globe, folks, you could find it online. What was the date on it, Bob?
I believe it was yesterday. Well, May 24th in the Boston Globe.
Yeah, the 24th of May. Yeah.
And Bob, she also compares it to the strides that were made after the Emmett Till killing and after Bloody Sunday, where responsible legislation was put forth. And as you say, after the George Floyd thing, there was a big push afterwards, but then everything died out. Why is that? Why have we become complacent as a nation?
Look, they tried to pass whatever in policing law, the justice in policing. I forget what the big broke.
Well, yeah, it hasn't even gotten to the death.
We know that Tim Scott, Senator Scott, and Senator Booker tried to come to some agreement, and Tim Scott basically swallowed Mitch McConnell's party line and would not collaborate in good faith with Cory Booker. So there's no federal law. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but isn't there today the day that Joe Biden, May 25th on the anniversary, is supposed to sign some executive order since they couldn't get any legislation through the Senate? It passed in the House, by the way. Nancy Pelosi made sure that got through the House, but it died in the Senate, just like everything dies.
We see the same thing with the mass shootings, which we're going to be talking about soon. And that is, they happen, and there's calls for legislation, and then it fades from public memory. It comes off the 24-hour news cycle, and all of a sudden people forget about it until it happens again. And these things, as you pointed out with George Floyd and with the mass shootings, they're going to happen again and again unless things change systematically. And then that's not happening because the Republican Party is obstructing all possible change in the United States.
Okay, you're right about the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell, where things go to die, because even though he's the quote minority leader, we Democrats really do not have anything because it's 50-50. And they got two senators who I will not name, who continue to help the Republicans block any of the most of the Democratic agenda. They've actually sided with the Democrats on one or two issues. But speaking of laws that can get passed, you can get all kinds of crazy abortion laws passed in all these states, though, because just last week, it'll be 2 weeks by the time this show airs, the state of Oklahoma passed the worst abortion. Let me call it, I don't know what to say, worse. Let's call it the most stringent abortion law that's been put on the books, because they're talking about from the moment of conception, as soon as that sperm hits that egg, you can't have an abortion. That means there's no such thing as a viable fetus. There's no such thing as has it become a person or whatever biologically. It's just, okay, sperm, fertilized egg, you cannot abort. And they now, Alan, what do you call it? The modern fugitive slave law, where they deputize and bounty-size or give relatives, friends, neighbors, strangers bounties if they report anybody trying to break this new law and get an abortion. Alan, I don't know, what does that say about the rights of individuals in this country?
Well, it's not only that, it's just the ignorance of medicine. They estimate that 40% of fertilized eggs self-abort. They just terminate because they don't embed in the womb correctly. I mean, to say that it's an illegal abortion at the point of fertilization basically criminalizes every woman in the United States. This is just insane. Now, what's going to happen is that people are going to resist this. I mean, I plan to support the organizations and not just do legal challenges, but will assist women and let them come and get me.
Yeah, I don't know, but it just seems like people's individual rights are just being trampled on nonstop in a lot of these state legislatures, and also in their constitutional rights as well, in the federal courts as well, because Supreme Court just ruled in favor of, I believe it was either Oklahoma or Texas, where two inmates had filed suit because they had insufficient counsel, improper, inept counsel, and both, if not one, may well have been innocent, but they can't file for an appeal on the grounds of sloppy counsel,
right?
Because the U.S. Supreme Court, on the 66-3 party line conservative judges, sided with the state, and so these people can be executed even if they might be innocent.
It's not just that they sided with the state. They basically have thrown out the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which mandates the federal government to review state decisions to make sure that due process is upheld.
And
this is
ineffective counsel is one of those issues. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But speaking of rights and laws, Raymond, the latest iteration of this, all the way down in the school levels, are tell me about that Florida kid.
Oh, the
young man in the state of Florida, Flagler County, I believe, some Palmdale, I forget where it is.
The young man who was prevented from running for class president?
Right, yeah, I mean.
Well, a young man who protested.
As an activist?
As an activist against the Florida Do Not Say Gay law, was prevented from running for his class presidency.
By his school?
By his school, because of his participation in this protest.
Yep. He gave out gay rights flags, and he did that. He was very clever because He didn't say gay. He just gave out the gay right flags. But then they disciplined him for that. And because he had a discipline record, they said he could not run for class president.
Which is like up in the ante. He
Yeah.
got disciplined,
Yeah.
but then, oh, okay, so since you're under disciplinary and edict, we will stop you from running for president.
They suspended him for 4 days for distributing the gay flag.
That was supposed to be his punishment. But then when he served that punishment, they came back and said, you can't run for president.
Well, that's why in Florida, even if you serve your time, you can't vote. That's
Yeah,
Florida.
Right.
Right.
They
Right.
do it to felons and they do it to high school students.
Right, and just to be specific, this was the Flagler Palm Coast High School, which is basically between, right between St. Augustine and Daytona Beach. A 17-year-old named Jack Petocz, Petotz. So just wanted to give him, a little bit of support here because he's just being a student.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, in another Florida high school, the senior class president was going to give his speech, and he self-identified as gay, and he was going to mention in his speech. So they told him if he mentioned that he was gay in the speech, they were going to turn off the mic. So what he did is he talked about the hardship of having curly hair. And I thought that was hysterical. It was a brilliant move.
Yeah, that one was so good, it hit the entire airwaves all across the country. But staying on high school students or students being put upon, there were two other stories that caught my eye. One, actually, not only was this person discriminated against for whatever, but he had a medical emergency. This was a Connecticut high school somewhere, and the young man had a stroke. I don't know, Ray, if you got that one.
I don't remember exactly what time, but apparently the young man had a stroke in class. And the school nurse decided that he didn't seem sick enough to call 911. So she called the parents, mother specifically, and insisted that the mom come and pick him up. Well, by the time school officials decided that, well, mom's taking too long, they decided to call 911. Ambulance came, took him to the hospital, found out that indeed he had a stroke, and he was in fairly serious condition by the time with the 45-minute delay.
The mother had a conversation with the school nurse about, don't come pick me up. Stroke's running our family. If he tells you he has a problem, you need to get him to a hospital. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
And just to add to the indignity here, his mother is in a wheelchair. She's in no position.
Which is why it was taking her a while to get there.
Right.
And she knew that it was going to be problematical because of the symptoms that she told the nurse that he was having. She said, that runs in our family. You need to get him an EMT to get him to the hospital. Craziness.
And
It took 45 minutes for them to finally do that.
Yeah. I'd be suing a school district if I were that woman, but that's another thing. And to wrap up our school thing about rights and unfair treatment, because that's the height of unfair treatment when they don't send you to the hospital. They wait for your mother to come. Young kid in Texas, in his lunchroom in school, some other guy comes up, grabs him around the neck, chokes him. They have basically, the video didn't look like a knockdown, drag out altercation, but one guy was assaulting another guy and choking him. And the guy basically pushed him off or whatever. And so they called it an altercation. The two individuals were brought up for disciplinary charges. The kid who was choked, who was sitting in the seat minding his own business, got a 4-day suspension. That's the Indian, South Asian, Indian young man. The white guy with the curly blonde hair got a 1-day suspension. And that's how that worked out. I don't know what that young man's parents are going to do about that inequitable treatment. But if I were them, I'd be filing some kind of something against that school for that kind of treatment. But I tend to be litigious, evidently.
It's like getting beat up by the police and then being arrested for resisting arrest.
Beautiful analogy.
You know?
Right. This happened in the Coppell Middle School in Texas, and students with and you're exactly right. It was an Indian student choked. And he's the one who got apparently 3-day suspension, which is ridiculous, while the attacker gets 1.
I saw the video. He wasn't aggressive at all. All he did was try to pull the man's arm off of his neck.
Yeah, it was really, you know, I can't, don't want to beat that one to death, but those are like 3 examples. Egregious, you know that word egregious that been popping up from the Supreme Court bench on down. Those were 3 egregious examples of young people suffering unduly for whatever reason I can't say. The kid in Connecticut was a black kid. The kid in Texas was an Indian kid. The young gay guy was a white kid. So it has nothing to do with race. It just has to do with who's running what. So,
The kid with
it
the
has
medical,
to do with
the
they
kid
were all
with the,
marginalized. And I think that's
Yes.
important, that they
yes,
did not
that's the key
understand.
word.
They weren't prepared to take seriously the black kid who was ill. They weren't prepared to take seriously the Indian kid who was being bullied. And they weren't prepared to take seriously the gay kids who
Yeah.
felt that they had been marginalized as well.
Alan,
even though they were white.
you put your finger on it, all marginalized individuals, all people who don't fit the, oh, should I say the white supremacist mold of white, heterosexual, straight people. So they're all marginalized examples, people who have been marginalized by the society in one way or another. You're saying, Bob, before we cut you off?
oh, I was just going to say that medical issue was in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and not
Yeah, where the
Connecticut.
black kid and his mother in the
Yes,
wheelchair were, right.
Yes, but go ahead.
So yeah, no. When you're young and you're in school, your rights usually get trampled on anyway, just because schools tend to be autocratically run. Alan, I know this is not normally here, but based on my experience in schools, public and parochial, they're autocratically run, and so your rights usually get trampled. But in this day and age, you can defend and protest when things like that happen, when they are as, quote, egregious as these examples have been. And I think people should. But speaking of schools, the story that's big in the news, that will still be in the news, we need to get into, because it can take us to the larger issue, and that's the Uvalde, Texas shooting. Any of you guys got the latest numbers? What I saw was 19 students and 2 adults, not counting the shooter who were actually killed. Does anyone know if one of those 2 adults was his grandmother, the shooter? I don't care about calling it.
Go ahead, Alan. You were
The
out there.
mother, the grandmother has not died yet. She is in the hospital. The
Right.
2 adults who were killed were 4th grade teachers. All the murders took place in one room. So all the 19 kids who were killed, the 2 teachers were killed, and there are 3 other young children in critical condition right now in the hospital.
As we speak. But this brings us, of course, to the issue of mass shootings. And just a week before, there was this shooting in Buffalo where 10 people were killed, and that was a white supremacist, crazed young man. Both these recent shooters were 18, correct? The one in Uvalde was 18, the one in Buffalo was 18. But it brings us to the issue that, of course, the Republicans never want to talk about. And that is basically, what are we doing about guns and the laws dealing with guns in this country? And we had an off mic discussion about why does this continue? And I threw out to you guys that it continues because of a poor interpretation of the Second Amendment. Alan, as the historian, tell us about that interpretation and why it's flawed and why it's causing this problem. And Ray, you'll be ready to jump in with what this malicious stuff is all about.
The Second Amendment reads, and this is the quote, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Well, there are 2 problems with this. The first is a well-regulated militia at that time was the equivalent of a volunteer police force. Today, we have well-regulated militia, and those are called the police. So the police can be armed. But the second piece of this is that they refer to the right of the people collectively. When they mean the right of an individual in the Constitution, they speak of persons. So under this amendment, communities have the right to maintain a well-regulated militia or peace or police force, but individuals do not have the right to own unregulated weapons.
And that's the way it was interpreted earlier in the history of this country.
And that's the way it's
When did
written.
it change? If you
What
remember.
happens is the right wing on the court keeps on broadening and changing that interpretation to argue that basically anybody has a right to own any gun they want.
And they were actually supported by some Supreme Court decision back in the 1950s, but I can't remember what the decision was. But it wasn't, that was not the interpretation prior to that. And so from the 1950s on, and folks, I'm giving you a guesstimate, it could have been early 60s, but I think it was the 50s. We've had this quote right-wing bent towards making the Second Amendment the Bible, wherein anybody can walk into a store and buy an AR-15 because he has a constitutional right. And I'm saying that's a misinterpretation of the Constitution.
In the 1990s, those automatic weapons were restricted, but that law expired after 10 years. So we know that we can regulate these weapons, but that law expired and the Republican Party has refused to ever bring it back. And even now, the leaders of the Republican Party, a senator from Utah named Lee, saying, well, this is not about guns. This is about family values. I mean, this is absurd. But the other thing that we need to note is both of these 18-year-old murderers purchased those guns legally in the United States. And this has got to stop. I mean, we've got to get angry. I know people saw Steve Kerr on TV in his interview, the coach from the Golden State Warriors. He was furious. Part of the reason is his father was killed in a mass killing. This has got to stop.
Raymond, you were saying something earlier about these legal versus illegal guns.
Well, most of the mass shootings that have taken place in this country have been perpetrated with illegally purchased and owned weapons. So, you know, there's validity to the argument that we need to do more about mental health and what have you. But you're absolutely correct, Eric and Alan. What really needs to happen is to ban the sale of firearms, period. Confiscate those that are as many as you can, which I don't know if that's possible at all. And then there's the other problem. You'll never get rid of illegal guns. They'll always be there. But the main situation, there has to be much stricter gun laws. You should not be able to go into a store and no matter what documentation you have, it shouldn't be as easy to get a gun as it is to get a driver's license. And I think some states it's easier to get a gun than it is a driver's license.
Bob, what were you, actually tell us a little bit about that altercation between Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, because people are, as the president of the United States, Joe Biden said, I'm sick and tired of these mass shootings. And we had an exchange where I said to you, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, quoting Fannie Lou Hamer, because she was right on target. She was sick and tired of being sick and tired about not having voting rights in this country. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of these people not passing these gun laws. Beto O'Rourke, evidently. Give us that, like, Bob.
Well, yeah, there was as we tape on Wednesday before the Monday air, there was a press conference held by Governor Abbott and his lieutenant, Dan Patrick, in Texas to talk about the school shooting in Texas, the 19 kids who died. And he went into a dialogue about how we need to focus on mental health. That's what Abbott did. And he, talked about, well, we need to provide this service and that service. But he said nothing. He said nothing about. He had nothing about gun limitations or anything like that. And so Beto O'Rourke, Democrat, walked up in front of the entire audience and lit into them and basically said he had done nothing. He had, we need to have this talk, and he was immediately set upon by somebody, well, yelled at by somebody else on the podium who called him an SOB and other things. But yeah, this is, and Alan's a mention of Steve Kerr. It's not the first time Steve Kerr has been explosively angry
about
over these shootings. He's done, he's expressed this before. This is a moment we're missing. And that's what Beto O'Rourke said. You're going to talk about mental health, but not the gun problem. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, no, those are, the assault weapons ban that expired, Alan, you remember? That law was passed overwhelmingly bipartisan when it was first put into.
When we still had a functioning United States government.
Yeah. And now we can't even talk about this stuff without somebody getting bent out of shape about, they don't want to hear about new gun laws. I don't want to hear about new gun laws. Only gun law I want is to ban all these guns, period. But I don't know, how much time do we have?
We have about 1.5 minutes.
Okay.
Eric, just to add, these kind of shootings only happen in the United States. Between 2009 and 2018, Canada had 2 shootings. France had 2 shootings. Germany had 1. Italy, Japan, United Kingdom had none.
I was just gonna say, I don't think a lot of our viewers, especially here in New York, realize it's impossible to get a gun here in New York. And that's the law that we live with, and we're used to that. But you go an hour and a half outside of Manhattan, in New York State, anywhere, you can buy a gun easier than you can get a driver's license. And that's just absolutely insane. You can go outside of New York, you can get a gun, you can walk down the street and buy a gun.
Yeah, and on that note, we're going to call it a day. But no, actually, you can find guns in New York. And unfortunately, that's why we got a problem. That's why our current mayor is saying we got to get these guns under control. But the bottom line is they don't have any gun manufacturers in New York. So these guns are coming from somewhere, okay? And so, but anyway, this has been great, guys. I appreciate your time. Folks, this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on Twitter and YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm Alan Singer, their guest and friend. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Dr. Singer. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
folks, we're out of time. My battery is almost out, so we're going to call it a day. And we'll catch you the next time. Stay safe. There's